Hey guys, welcome everybody to the first episode of what someone titled Jan's Opening Clinic. The format is quite simple. Chess24 premium users can ask me whatever opening questions they want and I will do my best to answer. I gotta say, first of all, thanks a lot. I got a lot of questions. Secondly, this is tough. When I was working as a second, I was working for Leko or for Smates or for some national teams, normally I would get like 2-3 assignments per night, and that would feel like a lot of work. Well, this time, I don't know, I haven't counted, but it feels like 100 individual questions. So apologies in advance if we don't get through all of them. We might have to make this a recurring series. Anyway, we got 90 minutes at 5:30. The show with Lawrence Trent is starting, the Q&A. I'm just the lead-in. So let's get rolling with the first question, which I think is the mother of all opening questions, really. Raghavendra is saying, I'll need 5 minutes before I can start speaking English. I'll try to read a bit first. Being the hopeless putzer that I am, I tend to spend the little time that I have for chess mostly on tactics and endings. Anyway. And of course your live streams too. Thank you. No time for openings. Sometimes on bad days, as black, I lose the game right of the opening. I'm okay handling e4 as black, alternate between Ruy Lopez mainline and Marshall. Against d4, I usually play d5, and I'm out of theory. I know the problem. Hence, will you be kind enough, or king enough even better, to suggest a minimalistic opening handling against 1 d4? I was reading that. What are you doing? Anyway, against 1 d4. There we are again. And 1 c4, sometimes something that isn't very sharp or has a lot of variations. I'm okay with learning some theory, that's a good start, but I would like to be in such a way that I can steer most of my games into those newly learned lines. I'm aware that there are a lot of transpositions in 1 d4 and might prove a nearly impossible task to find this minimalistic theory, but hey, come on, you're Jan the man, Gustafsson, I'm sure you'll find something. So that's a very long way of asking what do I play against 1 d4, and I have to disappoint you, as I'm sure I will disappoint many people during the show. There are no shortcuts. If you want a proper opening repertoire, you're going to have to study a serious line. Depends a lot on your tastes. If you want something dynamic counter-attacking, there's the Grunfeld. If you want something that is a bit more slow maneuvering but still offering hopes of a counterattack, there is the King's Indian. If you want something classical where you're fighting for the center and you have a fixed structure, there's the Queen's Gambit declined. If you want something where the center is not that determined but the position is still not that sharp and classical, there's the Nimzo-Indian, or its brothers, the Queen's Gambit, the Queen's Gambit, or the Catalan. Then there's some more major openings. There's the Slav, d4, d5, c4, c6, which can turn into a lot of things, sharp, not sharp. But it is very, very hard for me, unfortunately, to give you like the one plan you can play against every 1 d4 game and face the opening with confidence. There are a lot of guys who get by, and even strong grandmasters, by pretty much playing g6, next move bishop g7, then d6, and then taking it from there. But I'm not sure this is the answer you're looking for, and it wouldn't be my advice. My advice would be choose any main line depending on your tastes. Be it the Nimzo Queen's Indian, be it the Grunfeld, be it the King's Indian, and set a bit of time aside to study it and play it in games. Take it from there. Still, I'll give you your quick answer. d4, d5, that's where you play. c4, you play knight to c6. Then whenever white plays knight f3, you go bishop to g4. And if instead of knight f3, they play knight c3. I can't move the pieces. Are you doing something? There we are. They play knight c3, then you take on c4. After knight f3, you go knight f6. After d5, you go knight to a5, and you try to survive. Do you go knight a5 or knight e5? I'm not sure. I'm half serious that Chigurin d4, d5, c4, knight c6. I don't think it's a very good opening, but it leads to a very direct play, and you can play it knowing only minimal theory. So that's the shortcut. Another shortcut could be the Queen's Gambit accepted, but I would advise finding a more serious system, and pretty much I can't tell you which one to play. I never know myself. Choose one that you like, Queen's Gambit, Slav, Grunfeld, Nimzo, King's Indian, and stick with it. So, sorry that I already failed answering the first question. Let's move on to the next. Jacob98 is saying, which direction should I look, left or right when reading those? Because I can see it on two screens. It's fascinating. Great, I have two questions. I have a stupid looking line for black, which according to the engine is fully playable. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, h6. The idea is to stop the natural development of the bishop c1, and if white plays bishop f4, sooner or later play bishop to d6, sooner or later to neutralize that. So I would like to know if there is a refutation of this simple but logical looking idea. I analyzed some lines, and so far I found nothing special for white. What would you play against it if you would face it in practice? I don't know. h6, it doesn't contribute enough not only to development, but doesn't have concrete enough of an idea for my taste. Stops bishop g5, but there are some lines where I don't think it's all that useful. What I would probably do is go knight f3, knight f6, now play g3, switching to some kind of Catalan where I don't think h6 makes a lot of sense. Well, I have an extra move in knight c3, which I should benefit from. I'll follow up with bishop g2 and castles, and I'd be quite happy being white. I've briefly looked at the computer. It gives some weird moves here. Knight c6, bishop g2, bishop d6, castles, castles. And while black might not be losing, this tendency to go knight c6 in the opening and be happy is very much a computer hobby, which I do not recommend for humans to copy. I'm not sure if white just plays b3 here. I'd be quite happy with myself. So no, I'm not a big fan of the move 3h6. However, if you want a lazy line to play, and actually this might be good advice for Raga Vender as well in this position, and you want it slightly offbeat, move a6 is not so bad. That has a bit more purpose than h6 because it's threatening dc4, and you can try to win the game very quickly after knight f3, dc4, queen a4 check, b5, knight takes b5, and bishop to d7, picking up this knight. So there is at least a little trap you're setting. And it's not that easy for white to refute this move. I think it's actually quite playable. What they normally do is something like cd, ed, knight f3, c6, now queen c2 to stop bishop f5. But black seems to be kind of alright. You go bishop d6, knight e7, intending bishop f5. So if you want a lazy system with some surprise value that is playable, I'd rather go a6 than h6, but both of them are probably not long-term solutions. Part 2 of the question, what do you think about the Cambridge Springs? Let's put the Cambridge Springs on the board. Of course, many move orders are possible. Knight bd7, bishop g5, c6. Cambridge Springs starts after e3, queen a5. Why isn't the line played more frequently by top players? I consider to take this opening into my repertoire, so I would like to know if there's any reason nobody except Mamedyarov plays it at top level and what you would play against it. There are some reasons no one plays it. First of all, it's not that easy to get this actual position on the board because white has a lot of options along the way. For example, here there's c takes d5 going for this Karlsbad structure, and depending on the move order, white also has other ways to enter the semi-Slav or something. The other reason is I think people are afraid after queen a5 of c takes d5. I think it's just considered to be dangerous for black nowadays. Knight takes d5, there's this trendy move rook to c1, and while I haven't checked this in much detail, it looked quite pleasant for white. There was this game Carlsen against Mamedyarov, I guess. Knight c3, bc, bishop a3, rook c2, b6, bishop e2. Seemed like white is a bit better with his center, while if black after rook c1 tries to grab the pawn, what do they do? Bishop b4, White plays a3, takes. Let's say h6, bishop h4, queen a3, queen d2. It's also a position where I'd rather be white. Black is a pawn up, but it does not look like a lot of fun to play this or defend this with black, so I would not go here. The assessment might change, but in my opinion, that is a line they're afraid of with black at the moment, while white has a lot of alternatives, so I'm not that surprised that Cambridge Springs is not more popular. I hope that answered your question, but of course Cambridge Springs is a main line, so if you want to spend the time investigating this, by all means, go ahead. Next question I see on my screen is by Alex Schaefer 790, but I gotta disappoint you, Alex. You're not a premium member, and I'm only answering premium members' questions, so sorry, I can't take this one, and I gotta go to the next one. Oh, the next one is huge, by Mr. Pero Amor. I think he's posed more than one question, and within his question there is like 5 different questions, so I'll try to get through them, but apologies in advance, Pero Amor, if I can't answer all your questions. Let's start with the first one though. It says, hello Jan. Actually, let me open up the chat real quick to see if anybody's actually watching this show. Hello Jan. Of course, before going to the questions, I have to say thanks for all the good work you and your teammates are doing. Thank you. I would like to have your opinion on the following lines, more specifically about what are the chances for white to get some sort of pressure. Slav main line with d4, d5, with 6 knight e5, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, d takes c4, a4. This is the main line of the Slav. Bishop f5, knight to e5. Oof, this is a massive, massive line. I play it sometimes when I have something specific in mind. If I see my opponent plays a certain line and I have an idea for white in that line, I don't think it's all that practical to play it. I think white has decent chances for an opening advantage here. I think it's too much work to know all this stuff. Knight bd7, knight takes c4. You have to be ready for queen c7, e5, where there's 18 different big sublines that are all very complicated. And you have to be ready for knight b6, which is quite solid. You also have to be ready for this whole complex of e6, f3, bishop b4, e4, bishop takes e4, where black sacrifices a piece, which is also very, very complicated. And you have to be ready for c5 here, which is less complicated, but also a pretty solid choice. So I think white probably has decent chances for an opening advantage. It's an absolute main line, but it is a lot of work, so normally I'm too lazy to do it unless I have something very specific in mind, because one opponent sticks to the same line all the time. Like I once got in some very nice preparation against Inarkiev here in the World Cup, who always plays the same line, but normally I tend to stay away from it. Next question by Pero Amor is in the Queen's Gambit. Knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, the move queen c2. I think I've played this once, but this is more of a bluff, right? I can't remember, but I do remember that black was equalizing. I think with c5 was supposed to be equal. It's a decent surprise weapon for one game, but it's nothing I would recommend for every game. I can't remember the details. I've played it once or twice as a surprise. It's nothing I would do all that much. Anti-Grunfeld, 1 knight f3, 2 c4, 3 knight c3. With different ideas like 4 queen a4, or 4 cd5 and queen a4, queen c2, queen b3, or h4. Yeah, all of those can be played. I've played pretty much everything here, and I'm mixing it up. It's, once again, more of a question of daily preparation. I think most players are sick of having to cover all this anti-Grunfeld territory with the black pieces, because, as mentioned, white just has too many options here, and all of them are dangerous. So the trend is shifting towards knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5, knight c3, d5, which makes it a bit tougher for white to find something to do. There was this game, I think yesterday, cd, knight d5, e3 between Navarra and Nepomniachtchi, which looked quite good for white. So maybe the discussion is shifting a little bit here. But else, yeah, I've always been a fan of mixing it up with these anti-Grunfeld lines. Anti-Queen's Indian and anti-Nimzo. Yeah, same thing. If you're a one knight f3 player, you want to have the anti-Queen's Indian and anti-Nimzos in your repertoire. Well, first of all, there's g3, which stops the Nimzo pretty much, and knight c3, bishop b4. I've always liked the move queen c2 here. I think this is the anti-Nimzo, and I think it gives decent chances for a white advantage. Similar, well, always depends on the move order. Black plays b6 here. I guess e4 is a good move. So yeah, decent chances for white opening advantage here as well. But it always comes down to move orders. Black can play b6 here, black can play c5 here. It's always avoiding what you don't like and trying to lure your opponent into something that you do like. That's at least my approach to it. What, last line, I want to finish, what lines you like against the Hedgehog? I'm sorry I'm being very brief here, but I'm sure you guys understand that I could talk like 8 hours about every single one of those questions, but that would probably break the format of the show. The Hedgehog, this is the English Hedgehog, which is the most common version of it. I like the move d4 here. This is what I'm playing most of the time, cd4 and queen takes d4, keeping these bishops on the board. When I think white is a little better after knight c6, queen f4. Instead of knight c6, the more challenging setup is if black goes d6, planning a6, knight bd7 castles, where I've tried different moves. I've tried this line with bishop g5. I don't know how it goes. a6, rook fd1, knight bd7, queen d2, where probably white is nothing, but it's asking some tricky questions if black is not prepared. I've tried going for these setups with bishop takes f6, bishop f6, and now queen somewhere, queen f4. I think white is a little better here. And I've also tried, instead of bishop g5, to play something like rook d1, and if a6, bishop e3, or knight g5. There's many options here. Black is surviving in all of those. The Hedgehog is very possible, but I think there is enough ground for creating some pressure. So, Pero Amor, I hope that briefly answered most of your questions. I see you post a lot more, and we'll get to those if we still have some time. I could do like a 20-hour show, like I mentioned, on your questions alone. But for now, I think we're moving on to Edward Gilmedinov, so everybody who asks something gets a chance to be mentioned. If there's time in the end, we'll get back to Mr. Pero Amor for sure. 1 second, I'll just briefly open up my own show so I can see if there is, first of all, if I'm looking good, which is the most important thing, and then try to follow the chat. Well, someone's writing something, that's good. Thought the bars are for sound regulation, is what Taki is saying. No idea. I hope my sound is all right. Next question. Edward Gilmedinov is saying, hey Jan, I watched your Nimzo series. Thanks for that. And this greatly helped me not to only play the Nimzo with confidence, but also to not be afraid to go into Nimzo with black, sort of. Wasn't the idea, but still good if it helped you there. I know that after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, d5, you recommend cd, ed, bishop g5, and I'd be very happy to play this position with black. But what about 5a3? After, I'll put it on the board. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, d5. I also consider the most challenging move, the most principled move in this position. And yeah, I was recommending c takes d5, not claiming huge edge for white, but I thought this move was more practical. The question is what to do after a3, and he's saying after bishop c3, queen c3, knight e4, queen c2, c5, dc, knight c6. This is one of many lines. Knight f3, queen a5, bishop d2. White is better. First of all, I don't agree with that one necessarily, but I've had a look at this line. I think the best move here is queen c5, e3, takes, and it is playable for white. It's only very, very small edge, and black should be defending. But I do agree this is a playable line for white. Reason I'm not advocating a3 is first of all, that black has too many options. After bishop c3, queen c3, I'd be concerned about the move castles, which transposes to a line that you normally see after bishop b4, queen c2 castles, where I'm recommending this goofy move knight f3. But there's around 1,000 Kramnik games with black which reach this position via this move order, where black seems to be holding quite comfortably nowadays. However, that could change, but still, that's one line I would like to avoid. And there's more after a3, bishop c3, queen c3. The problem is black has such a huge choice, and all the lines look playable to me. Queen knight e4, queen c2. I think e5 is a decent move here, at least I've never managed to refute it. Just blowing the position open, planning knight c6, bishop f5. And there is also the cousin of e5, the move knight to c6 first, followed by e5 on the next move. So I've never managed to get anywhere in all those lines, and that's why I'm not that happy with a3 as a repertoire choice. However, if you're playing someone who likes this line with knight e4 and c5, and you think white is better there, or you're happy with the line you mentioned, by all means go for it. Still, as a practical choice, I would not go here with white, and with black I would either play like Kramnik, which is the move castles in this position, or I would have a closer look at knight e4, queen c2, and now either knight c6 or e5. I think e5 is quite an underrated move here and probably alright for black. So I hope that helps you with that question. Thanks, Eduard Gilmadinov. Moving on to Mr. Martin Gell. He's saying, "Hi Jan, which line do you recommend for black after the moves d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, e3? I have to start answering that question here already. Now let's first put it on the board, knight f6, e3. For me, this move order was never much of an issue because I was a semi-Slav player, not a pure Slav player. What I mean by that is that after knight f3, my repertoire is the move e6, most of the time at least, not the move d takes c4. So the move order with white playing e3 is normally directed at avoiding these d takes c4 lines. They're not a problem if you want to go e6, because after e6 here, white normally transposes with knight to f3 anyway. So for me, this was never an issue repertoire-wise. If you are, however, a dc4 player, this move order is an issue repertoire-wise for you. And what I would recommend if I was a pure Slav player, I would not, if white starts with knight c3, not with knight f3, I would make use of the extra option after 3 knight c3 and play the move d takes c4 in this position, which is an interesting line, and I've spent a lot of time trying to refute it to no particular avail. So I think this is quite playable, and this would be my repertoire if it was combined with, after knight f3, knight f6, knight c3 taking on c4. To answer the second part of your question, after knight c3, knight f6, e3, the move bishop f5, I've seen there are some games with this gambit. I never took it all that seriously. After cd, cd, queen b3, knight c6, queen takes b7, bishop to d7. There have been some outings, and black gets some play for the pawn. I'm not convinced it's enough. Queen b3, rook b8. I think that's what they play. Queen d1, e5. And I don't know. I don't fully trust it for black after something like takes, takes. Many moves are possible. Knight e2 here is something I looked at once, I believe. It's possible black gets enough play to survive. When I checked it, it didn't jump out at me as something that I want to try with black. So it's playable, and if you analyze it, I'm sure it's a decent surprise weapon for a game or two. My repertoire, if this is a pure Slav player perspective, would probably be the move dc4 instead of knight f6. I hope that answered the question. Let's move on to second part of the question. What setup do you like most for black in the main line of the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann? e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5, knight f3, e6, bishop e2. Well, the very honest answer is I don't like any setup for black, which is why I'm not playing the Caro-Kann a lot nowadays. This pawn on e5 is generating a lot of space, and I think this position is quite dangerous for black. Still, when I was looking at it, my favorite line was normally to start with the move knight to e7 here, and then after castles to play c5, which as far as I know is a huge theoretical mess. I'm not in touch with latest developments here. c4, knight bc6, and I don't know what they do. I guess they take on c5 here when it is a huge mess. I'm not sure. That's the line I would investigate, but I would not be surprised to find out that black is in some kind of trouble there. So my honest answer is I don't like any line all that much, but knight e7 is the one that I would look into. And Martingale, third question. At the 2012 Olympiad, you played the line e4, c6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, a6, d4, bishop g4, h3, bishop h5 with black. Game went bishop e2, I remember, but what was your plan after the critical line g4 with the idea bishop g6, ed, cd, knight e5? No idea. This line is good for white, and I was aware of that and am aware of that. I just use a6 against lower rated opponents when I feel like the position after bishop g4, h3, bishop takes f3 is a little dull or doesn't offer enough winning chances. Black has a choice between playing the line with knight f6, e5, knight e4, or a goofy move like a6, but you are absolutely right. The main line you're mentioning is good for white, and I would not recommending this as a stronghold in your repertoire. So yeah, don't overdo it with the move a6. I promise I won't either. Let's move on to Sushi Boy 8. Let's see what Sushi Boy 8 has to say. Oh, praise. I like praise. Keep it coming. It's tough for me to have both windows open, so sorry if I'm not following the chat at all times. I'll check in with you guys once in a while and see what's going on there. Here we are. Niklas is trolling. That's what he does. Anna Andres is there. A lot of action. Looks like it's mainly Niklas talking to Anna Andres. Niklas is asking for some more e4 stuff. I think he asked some trolling questions, which will come to later. For now, Sushi Boy 8. Let's see what he says. Hi Jan, I love your fantastic work for Chess24. Thank you so much. The two biggest problems for a 1d4 player like me are how to face the Nimzo-Indian Defense complex and the Grunfeld. Yeah, I'm familiar with both of your worries. Most of us d4 guys have those problems. Some questions on specific lines. Nimzo, what do you think of the 4e3, 5 knight ge2 setup? And if you don't like it, why not? Interestingly, Carlsen plays it with white sometimes. Yeah, I don't like it much. I've played it once or twice. I don't think it gives white an opening advantage. And it's not so much to my liking, because it leads to slow maneuvering positions more often than not, which is of course fine if you're Magnus Carlsen. You can outmaneuver your opponents. It's not so fine if you're me and you need computer lines to get an opening advantage. Objectively, I think black is alright after d5, a3, both bishop d6, but especially bishop e7. If you have a look at the recent game, Carlsen against Wesley So from Vaikanze, for example, Magnus didn't get very far there either. So if you like slow maneuvering games, and I don't even know how they play it here, CD, ED, G3, something like this, you're okay with this structure and this position, by all means, play it at least once in a while. I would never make it a big part of my repertoire. I don't think it's for me. Queen's Indian. What is currently the most promising fifth move for white after g3, bishop a6? I don't know. g3, bishop a6. Yeah, I keep changing my mind here. Once again, for me it's more being flexible. I think theoretically, as in most major openings, black should be alright, so I try to surprise him once in a while. I've played a bit of queen a4, not much going on there. Queen b3, I'm not up to date, I have to admit, I'm not sure. Queen c2 is always a huge line. I don't think there the last word has been spoken. I'm just naming all the moves basically, because I'm not sure which one is the critical one. I think there's been some action in the knight bd2 line recently, right? Like some guys tried it against Alekhine, so maybe knight bd2 might be a place to look for something. Else, I don't have any particular ideas in store that I would be willing to or that I would be happy to get in and hoping to enter this line at the moment. So sorry to disappoint you, I don't have anything. Probably knight bd2 is where there's developments at the moment, but I don't have anything special in mind there right now. Might change though. Grunfeld, what do you recommend for someone who likes a fixed and relatively solid pawn center? And what do you think of the various bishop g5 lines, like 4 bishop g5 or 5 bishop g5, knight e4, cd? Let's put this on the board. Knight e4, cd, knight g5, knight g5, e6, knight f3, etc. These lines seem the closest I can find. Many thanks in advance for your answers. Yeah, there you got a fixed and stable pawn center. The problem is you don't have any advantage whatsoever. It's the good old classical Carlsbad structure where black already has the 2 bishops. And yeah, it's not a line I would go for. I think it's quite easy to play with black. a5, c6, castles, rook e8, bishop f8, bishop d6. I'd be happy. If you're looking for a fixed pawn center and don't want something too risky or complicated, I think this line is quite interesting, but instead of cd5, I would play bishop f4, which you see the occasional game, but normally it leads to something like this: cd5, queen d5, e3. I don't know the main line. I think it's takes, castles, bishop e2, knight c6, and castles. When you get your fixed pawn center, I think white has a better structure. Black has been holding themselves here, but it's not a position where white can't ask some questions. Well, I think this is relatively risk-free, like queen a4 or something here. So that would be my suggestion, not claiming any opening advantage here either, of course. After cd, there's also these endings with queen a5 check, but I think it's a line where white controls the center and it's kind of fixed and easy to play. Not sure it's a line for you, but that's the best I can think of right now. So, Sushi Boy 8, I hope that answered your question, at least to some extent. And I'm moving on to Fabi's question is more general, so let's go to Mr. Taki. Hey Jan, I guess you already got enough praise by the members before me. Nah, not enough, so some praise would be nice before you get to your question. But I'll let that slide and answer anyway. My questions. What is your recommendation if white plays in the marshal 12 g3 instead of d4 d3? Someone told me you crushed knightage as black with it. Yeah, the good old days. I did win a game against knightage there. I don't know, play like I did in that game. Look it up somewhere. That would be my recommendation. I don't think the 12 g3 line is all that popular these days. At least I haven't seen a lot of recent games with it, and I don't think all that much has changed. Just briefly putting it on the board. Move g3 here instead of the more normal d4 or d3. It's playable, but it's nothing special. Bishop d6, rook e1. The idea of g3 is that queen h4 is no longer possible. And if you think you're being smart and are playing queen d7 to go here, white will outsmart you and play d3, queen h3, rook e4, and kick your queen out. So you can't do that, but last time I checked, everything was fine for black in these bishop f5 lines. So yeah, I would recommend playing that. Study my game against knightage and take it from there. Number 2, you convinced me to play e5 after 1 e4 with your series. That's good to hear. What is your recommendation against the Italian and 4 knights game? Are there lines where black can get serious winning chances? Serious winning chances. It's always a tricky topic with the series winning chances. If white plays perfectly, black is not going to get series winning chances in any opening. That's the trouble with it. So the definition is always tricky. But of course I understand where you're coming from. In the Italian, white is quite solid. So if you're playing a much weaker rated opponent, and you want to generate series winning chances after e4, you might want to consider the move c5. Even I do that once in a while. And to answer your question, the Italian, okay, I wouldn't mind. There's many different ways to play it. Knight f6 is normally the move you play instead of bishop c5 if you're trying to generate winning chances. You allow the move knight g5, which leads to some very complicated lines, but there's serious winning chances for black there. While if white goes d3 here, which is the more solid approach, black has some options. You can put the bishop on e7, keeping some pieces on the board. I recently played h6, followed by g6, bishop g7, castles, keeping pieces on the board. So this is quite playable. But yeah, what can I say? One c5 leads to a more unbalanced position if your opponent is a Juco piano player and you're concerned about that. The 4 knights is another very, very solid line. I'll admit that one as well. I don't know, the most dull is always this Scottish 4 knights, d4, ed, knight takes d4. Against bishop b5, for example, I don't see that many problems. You can play bishop b4, or you can play the move bishop d6, and there's decent winning chances in both. d4 is a challenge. We've recently seen this game, what was it? Knighted Aronian, where Aronian did something quite funky at least. Castle, I think he played rook e8, queen f3, bishop d6. Was that what he played? Something like this. And at least the position became very unbalanced. So that might be a line you want to try, but it's hard to have everything. It's hard to fight for control in the center and try to neutralize white's pressure and then get a very unbalanced position. So it's very tough to be safe and have your opponent being unsafe, if that makes sense. So you gotta compromise a little bit, but there's always some lines like the ones I showed which are playable, and most of the time, if you're the stronger player, serious winning chances will occur by making better moves no matter what line your opponent plays. Let's see if we got more questions. Oof, this is like a list of a lot of questions. Anyway, I'll get through them a bit more quickly. The next one is, yeah, it's a big problem for me as well. Bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, and the move 6d3. This has become quite popular. To avoid the knight off, Peter Svidler did an opening series from the white perspective for Chess24 on this line. And I'm still hoping to get him to do a guest chapter on my Marshall anti-Marshall series from the black side on what to do here. I think black has a decent choice nowadays. It's quite well analyzed and quite well played between different lines. I think in the d6 lines black is okay. c3, knight bd2, rook to e8, planning bishop f8, and then b5, d5. I think those are quite okay for black, and I think the b5 lines are also okay. Bishop b3, d6, a3, castles, knight c3. And the safest is probably bishop g4, bishop e3, and knight to d4. To me, those look alright. For more details, check out Peter Svidler's series, but I think both of these lines are perfectly playable for black and lead to complicated positions, but not an opening advantage for white. Oof, moving on. Tucky, a lot of questions here. Now from the view of the white player. If I have to face the King's Indian, is it viable to use the variation that Kramnik used against Nakamura? Yeah, whatever Kramnik plays, you can normally copy. He crushed Nakamura. I can't even remember how the line goes exactly. I think I did a video on it, which I'm sure you can find on the Chess24 YouTube channel. And yeah, it did look like a dangerous idea. What was it? I know, it wasn't. I really can't remember what the line was. Was it knight f3, h3? Or, oh no, now I remember. It was the Petrosian. Bishop e2, e5, d5, a5. He went bishop g5, h6, bishop e3. Yeah, by all means, if you take a look at it and prepare it, it's very concrete stuff. I think it was knight g4, bishop d2, f5, takes, no what, h3, knight f6, queen c1. I think, yeah, especially against an opponent who didn't expect this from you, this is a very good weapon for at least one game. So by all means, go there. I hope that answered your questions, Taki. Before we move to the next one, I'll take a little break to check out the chat. It's not going to be a break, just reading up on what's going on here. Ninja Nimzo says, "Hey Jan, I'm a premium member. Looks my question was skipped. Do you mind going back?" Did I skip it? I don't think I've seen it. It says you're not a premium member. Weird. Yeah, the little crown is missing indeed. That's odd. Apologies. We'll get to Mr. Ninja Nimzo. Let's see what Ninja Nimzo has. He says, "Hi Jan, thanks for your great work." Thank you. Keep the praise coming. The martial gambit has a drawish reputation at the highest level. Why should a player below FM level play it? I'm not sure I'm following your logic here. You're saying it has a drawish reputation at the highest level, so it doesn't have a drawish reputation at weaker levels, and why should it be played below FM level? I'm not sure I get the question. I think it's a pretty good weapon to beat opponents, even at my level. Like, if you mix it up a bit there, of course, I'm not going to pretend the martial gambit is going to lead to a win. No sharp opening if you analyze it enough for black. Black is better. But I think the martial offers enough scope to play for a win. And I'd be happily play it at lower levels. But of course, that is a matter of choice. If you want to keep more pieces on the board or play less concretely, then you shouldn't play it, but instead play... Let me just get the position up. 1 second. Instead you can play the move d6, c3, castles, h3, and plenty of systems here with knight a5, knight b8, bishop b7 that lead to slower maneuvering positions with a board full of pieces. I like the martial because it leads to more concrete stuff, which is more in line with my style, but I don't think it's a question of level necessarily. What book videos would you suggest for a complete e4 repertoire as black that complements your martial work? I've done some earlier work for a competitor, which I might update one of these days, but of course that's always highly recommended. Else, I gotta tell you, I haven't been reading a lot of books or watching a lot of videos on e4, e5 recently, so I'm not very qualified to answer that question. I'm sure there's some good books out there, but I have to admit, I don't know them. Like, I had one book, but that's like 20 years old, which I was quite happy with, by John Ems, Play the Open Games as Black. But I'm guessing it's a bit outdated nowadays, and there are more updated ones. But I'm sorry, I honestly don't know. I haven't kept track of publications there so much. Number 3, when will you create your repertoire series versus 1d4 as black? Many of us are waiting for it. Well, the day I have a repertoire versus 1d4, which I really don't. I keep switching around because I don't know what to do. So it's tough, and I have to refer to the excellent repertoire series by Mr. Robin van Kampen on the King's Indian and Mr. Svidler on the Grunfeld. I think we have more repertoires. I think we have a Nimzo by Niklas Huschenbeet, Bogo Indian by Niklas Huschenbeet. So we have quite some repertoires against 1d4. My problem is I don't have a repertoire against 1d4, so at the moment I can't do a series. I'm more jumping around. That might change, but right now I don't know what to play. I don't feel qualified to do a semi-Slav series or a Nimzo series or a Queen's Gambit series. Right now, one opening I'm interested in, and I might take a look at one day, is this, what do you call it, the Ragozin, knight c3, bishop b4, but that's from me taking a look at it to making a repertoire series. It's gonna take a while, so sorry about that, but we do have excellent repertoires on the site, and I can happily refer you to those. I've watched all of them, and there's some pretty good stuff out there. I just gotta decide what I wanna do against d4 first. Like, there's no line I'm as happy with against 1d4 as I am with my e4, e5 stuff, so I switch around more after 1d4. I hope that answers your questions. Sorry for skipping Ninja Nimzo, and let's move on to where I was. I answered Taki's questions. And yeah, next in line seems to be Mr. Bruce Lee 32. What's he saying? He's saying, "Hi Jan, I've watched your series about the Nimzo and your 1D4 repertoire. I like them very much, so I have a question about a black opening." Fair enough. After e4, I play e5, but don't feel confident against the king's gambit. That's your problem? White losing a pawn on the second move and weakening his king? That's a strange problem to have. Previously, I played the king's gambit declined with bishop c5. Now I've looked at e takes f4, followed by bishop e7, but I'm not so sure about it. What do you think is the best way to play this opening? Thanks in advance for your answer. I don't know, I just never worry about it because I think black is better here already, and I'd be very, very happy to start the game from this position. So I don't have strong opinions. I think we had an earlier question by one of the ones I skipped because he was asking too much for me to answer, by Pero Amor, who had similar problems. I like the move g5, and I think with a bit of work here, this is an excellent way to answer it. Just keep your extra pawn, check the critical lines, and you'll be all right. That was suggested, I think, yeah, earlier. This move, knight e7, was inquired about, which I think is also a very playable move. Bacro plays it. However, one has to say, Bacro always plays knight e7, and Bacro is the only guy at top level who gets the king's gambit a lot in his games. Guys somehow feel like against this knight e7 stuff, they can make something happen. d4, d5, and queen e2 was the latest. But knight e7 is a move that also looks decent to me, preparing d5 and preparing to put the knight on g6. But honestly, the king's gambit is not an opening that is causing me to lose a lot of sleep, because I just think it's bad. And I'm sure this statement will come back to haunt me, and I will get crushed in countless King's Indians. But it's just very hard for me to take this gambit seriously, where white gives up a pawn and weakens his king and does not gain a lot of development time in return. So I'm not buying it, and it doesn't cause me much trouble, at least mentally. And after knight f3, yeah, my main recommendation would be put in the work and play the move g5. If you don't like that, take a look at the move knight e7. Both of those seem alright to me. I hope that helped. Where was I? 1 second, I'll be right there. Yeah, that was Bruce Lee 32's question. Yeah, guys, don't worry about the king's gambit, seriously. You in Trouble is saying, "Hi Jan, just wanted to ask you whether it is essential to know a lot about various openings to win blitz games." Yeah, it doesn't hurt, especially in blitz games. You don't have that much time to think, so if you can bang out the opening and save time there, and your opponent has to start thinking before you, I think it's a great, great asset, especially in blitz games, to know your theory. So yeah, absolutely. Taki is asking, why are your comments disabled in the Marshall? Why are comments disabled in your Marshall series? I think someone's fixed that, right? I think that's been addressed. Apologies if something was wrong there. No clue. Flow Power is saying, "Dear Jan, I've got a question concerning your uncontested knowledge of the Slav exchange god." Nah. Gotta disappoint you already. Slav exchange, I've gotten a bit bored with it. So my knowledge is no longer that great, but let's see what the questions are. After d4, d5, c4, c6, cd, cd, bishop f4, knight c6, e3, knight f6, knight c3. Black has 3 independent moves at his disposal, namely a6, bishop f5, or e6. Well, also bishop g4 if you want to make the list 4. What do you suggest against each of them, and could you name a helpful game of reference for each line? Flow Power is trying to trick me into an exchange Slav lecture here. First of all, when I was playing the exchange Slav, I was normally playing the move knight f3, not e3, via different move orders here, which changes things, because then after a6, I was goofing around with moves like rook c1, which it could transpose to, but it's still a different story. Still, I know a bit about these lines with e3 instead of knight f3 as well, which are more critical nowadays. I might also have played them once or twice. I can't even remember that well. So let's briefly address the questions. a6, yeah, this is the main line. You go bishop d3, bishop g4, knight ge2, and you pretend you're slightly better. You follow it up with castles, then you go queen b3, rook c1, knight a4, f3, depending to what works, and it's not easy for black to equalize. This is actually a line where I think white has decent chances for an opening advantage. Game of reference, I'm not sure I can come up with one. I think Sargsyan had some good games here with white. The Aronian trainer, Gabriel Sargsyan, very strong player. I liked what he was doing there. Bishop f5. Yeah, this always looked like a sound move to me. The trendy line, I think this is mentioned in the comments somewhere, is... or maybe it was the next question, I'm not sure. I think I read it somewhere. Here's the line with queen b3. When black goes knight a5, queen a4 check, bishop to d7. I couldn't find much here for white. Queen c2 is the move they've mainly played, but it's never appealed to me all that greatly. I like this weirder looking move, queen to d1 in this position, because in many lines the queen is better on d1 than on c2 actually. I think this has recently been played by, I don't know who's played this, Li Chao or someone gave this a try. It's not necessarily great for white, but I thought this might be a better try than queen c2, believe it or not. So yeah, not much to claim here either, but that was a line I thought could make a bit of sense. And what else was the question? E6. I don't know, I've never looked at e6. If black goes e6, white is better by default because he locked in this bishop, bishop d3, bishop d6. Yeah, you can take and play f4. This looks pleasant for white. Knight f3, knight e5. And if black doesn't go bishop d6 because bishop e7, I don't know, I've never checked this. I think white is just better. You go, I don't know, maybe start with h3, castles, knight f3, then you can put a knight on e5 when it's convenient. Castle, play on the queen side. White is better. I've never worried about this because black is just very passive. So e6, I don't know, I'm sure some lazy guys play this, but it's not a line that concerns me or would concern me all that much. So yeah, I'm afraid I didn't answer all your questions, but those are my thoughts about the semi-Slav. In general, yeah, I've grown less fond of it because this structure is a bit limited. There's just not that much to do. I still think it's as good a try for an opening advantage. Okay, well, let's start with bishop f4. For an opening advantage as any, but it gets a bit boring. Even the lines where I think white is a bit better with a6, it's just not that much to do with this center, this fix. There is not a huge array of different strategies to use. So I think it's very, very playable for white, but it's, first of all, it's tough to find an advantage objectively, as it is everywhere. And secondly, it's hard to surprise your opponent if you do this exclusively. So my love affair with the, what do you call it, exchange Slav is not very strong nowadays. Yeah, I addressed the question Flow Power has in part 2 already. Concerning bishop f5, there is a trendy main street with queen b3. Yeah, I've talked about that. Do you see any chance for an advantage here for white? Do you have a recommendation or novelty against Avruch's suggestions as black? Gotta disappoint you again. I have not read Avruch's book. Does he have a book on the Slav? I guess he has. I haven't checked that. But yeah, as I mentioned, I've spent some time here. I've tried to make bishop b5 work. Doesn't really seem to work. I've tried to make queen c2 work, which also wasn't very impressive. So best I could come up with was queen to d1, which obviously is not winning either, but at least I thought this was asking some questions. So that's it about the exchange Slav for today, which, Yeah, I don't know. I might come back to it, but at the moment I'm not that excited about it. Let's see what's going on in the chat before we move on. People are talking about stuff, and I'm sorry I'm rushing through this thing. I'm guessing we have to make more episodes. I have half an hour left, and there is a lot of questions also in the chat. But yeah, let's keep going. Bill1226 is pointing out this is quite an ambitious format. Kudos for Jan for taking on all the random questions. I doubt Jan will ever get to my earlier question on the Rati. I'm not sure I've seen that. Did I skip another early question? Yeah, sorry. I've been ignoring questions from the chat because I still have too many in the comments to jump through. However, if there is more popular demand for all my opening wisdom, we'll come up with new versions of this show and we'll do it again another time. For now, I'll keep rushing through them as fast and profound as I can. Phoenix 2K is saying, "Hi Jan, for black after d4 knight f6, c4 e6." Oh, this is one of the more general questions. d4 knight f6, c4 e6. Which system do you recommend for black which is reliable and offers chances to play for a win like the Nimzo after knight c3? I don't know. I normally play d5 here, but that's more for repertoire reasons and because it's the move I like best. When, as mentioned, after knight c3 you can play the move bishop b4, which is quite a close relative to the Nimzo with similar ideas. Looks pretty reliable as well. All the best players in the world are playing it now. Kramnik, Anand, Carlsen, Topalov, you name them, they've played this opening. So this is certainly a trendy line which I'm very interested in as well, which can be recommended. If you want to keep it more pure Nimzo style, you can play the b6, Queen's Indian, which is fine, or the bishop b4 check, Bogo Indian, which is also very playable. It's a matter of taste. I think there's enough room to create winning chances in all of those. The line I'm into at the moment is the Ragozin d5, knight c3, bishop b4. And of course, if you play d5, you got to be ready for the move g3 as well. But the Catalan, first of all, is not that popular, and secondly, after dc4 or bishop b4 check, I'm sure you'll manage to generate winning chances there as well. It's not that drawish, all that territory. Moving on, Phoenix 2K, I hope that answered your question. What we got here, Reich, first of all, he thanks me for stuff, which I always appreciate. Then there's a question, famous quotes about 1f4. Ugh, I don't even want to read those. I don't see the point to 1f4. It's a bit better than e4, e5, f4 because it doesn't lose a pawn, but it also doesn't do all that much. It weakens your future king's position. It doesn't really contribute to development. So it's not a move I would lose a lot of sleep over either. I think there's a later question. Malanyuk said, the extra move's gonna hurt me. Do you agree with Malanyuk, and if so, can you explain it a bit further? In other words, can it really be worse to play a black opening a tempo up, or does white only give up hopes for an opening advantage? I don't think it can be worse, but of course it depends on the case. In general, black openings and white openings are two very different animals, even if you look at the position. Let's say you play c3, e5, d3, d5, d4, knight c6. This position looks ridiculous from the white side, but if it is the Caro-Kann, then you know you're playing a main opening. And if you're black here, you would automatically play knight c6, or I would, while for white the main move is 3 e5. I'm not sure if this is making any sense, but it's a useful exercise sometimes if you're looking at a position to look at it from the white side, if you're looking at a black opening, and it will look quite funny. Or like after c4, e5, d3, you're playing the Najdorf, one of the most combative openings out there at tempo up. But if you play the move to d3, it just looks passive and kind of ridiculous from the white side. So there's a psychological element. Theoretically, yeah, a lot of the black openings, even the sharp ones, they're built to equalize, to create counterplay. While with white, it's your move already. You don't need to equalize. You should use your time to develop your pieces and generate pressure in the center. And 1f4, I don't think is very built towards that. It's still not a terrible move, and it's been played sometimes as a surprise weapon by Svidler and Nepomniachtchi, the likes of those, but I don't think it will catch on as a main opening. I'm not a big fan of f5 for black either, because I think it's a weakening move later. So yeah, not a fan of 1 f4. Taki has one final question. Are you confident with your marshal that you could even draw to Carlsen with it? Nah, he would probably find a way, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be a theory victory. If you've studied Carlsen's games, he does not normally try to go into theory debates and refute openings. He would play some slowish, boring line. So let's say I don't think Carlsen would crush me in the opening in the marshal, but he might have a decent chance of beating me in some random line. But I'm quite confident in the marshal as an opening. So if you give me a computer and the marshal against Carlsen, then I think I'll hold. Reich is having more questions. I'll try to come back to those, but earlier I've ignored someone who asked more than one question. So I'll move on to other premium members first, and if there's more questions later, we'll get to those. Quite a Reich sequence here. Black Rook, now that's not really an opening question, is it? What is the most efficient way for me to improve as I've gone from 1737 to 1951 in 1 month and not sure what to do next? Whatever you've done last month, just keep up with it. If it won you 200 points, keep doing it. Probably you've been watching my videos, my expert advice. No, I have no idea. It's a bit too general of a question for this opening clinic. Maybe it's a thinly veiled brag, because it's pretty cool to win 200 points in a month. So keep doing that. Chesspin is asking, what is the best defense against Scotch Gambit? I don't know. What is the Scotch Gambit? Is it d4, ed, bishop c4, that stuff? I don't know. Knight f6 is fine. The easiest, which I normally do because of laziness, is to play bishop c5 when white goes c3, hoping for this trick with d takes c, bishop takes f7. But if black after c3 just plays knight to f6, we're transposing to a theoretical line of the Italian with cd bishop b4 check, which is absolutely fine for black. So this is one lazy approach to it, at least if this is your repertoire anyway, and what I would normally do. But I'm not quite sure this is what you mean by Scotch Gambit. I hope so. What else we got? JV Ferreira is saying, is e4, g6, d4, bishop g7, knight c3, d5 good? No. White can win a pawn with 4 ed5. Knight bd7, bishop g5. I think you forgot to include knight f6, bishop c4 there in your line, JV Ferreira. But anyway, knight f6, bishop c4, knight bd7, and yeah, white can keep his extra pawn with bishop g5. I don't know, it's not a line I ever studied from the black perspective, because I feel like even if you get everything you want, you're still slightly worse. Let's say I go knight f3, I'll allow you to win your pawn back. Okay, you probably castle, I castle. Go knight b6, bishop b3. You take, I take, you take. I play rook e1. I feel like this is still a pleasant position for white, where black already achieved everything he could hope for, getting his pawn back. I think white is seriously better here, because you can't get in c5 or e5 so easily. So it's not a line I would play or recommend. Moving on to yet another question. Königsmörder is saying, I need a sharp and good line for black after... Oof, this is a more concrete question, but at least in the line I know. d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, bishop g5, dc4, a4, which is not a dumb move. I've played it myself to avoid the Botvinnik main lines. Thanks for posting the diagram, by the way. More people should do it. Makes it easier to see which position you mean exactly. Anyway, dc4, a4. I believe the best move for black is bishop to b4. White normally goes e4, and here you go, queen to a5. Now the idea of white normally plays is bishop d2, covering this stuff. Black goes c5. I think black is fine here. Bishop takes c4, cd, knight d4, just castle. Yeah, I don't think black has any problems. There was some weird lines, knight c2. I think you go knight c6 actually, give up this bishop. But this is absolutely fine for black. So a4 is not a line to be all that afraid of. Let's go to part 2. Not sure if I'm being fair here, by the way. I'm not allowing people to ask more than, or not reading out more than one question. I'm reading out part 1 till 18 all the time. We'll find out how the balance goes. Anyway, part 2. I know you answer e4 with e5. That's my image. I've played a lot of e4 c5 recently. You guys aren't following all my exciting games, it looks like. But do you know something about this line? e4 c5, knight f3, d6, knight c3. Do you have an idea here? e4 c5, oops, sorry. Knight f3, d6, knight c3. I don't know, looks like a way to transpose to mainline Sicilians, right? What's the idea? Knight f6, you want to go e5, or what's the point? Because if white plays d4, you just take and we're back in the main lines. e5 I've never looked at, but it looks completely harmless, doesn't it? If you're afraid of it, you can probably start with a6 or g6, depending what your favorite Sicilian is. But I'm not quite sure I get the question after knight f6, because I don't see any dangerous move for white. So sorry to let you down there, Königsmörder. Maybe I misunderstood. Niklas Huschenbeet is saying, I've been waiting for this all my life. I know you have. He's trying to make me look bad by asking some questions about sharp lines in the Najdorf, where he knows I'm not a big expert because I never play 1 e4 nor the Najdorf. So I'm assuming those are joke questions and I won't help Niklas out with those. But in the end he says, okay, I got one serious question. How do you conduct opening analysis? Is there any tool that is particularly valuable to you, except for the engine? For example, do you look into correspondence games, etc.? Might have to share all my wisdom here, and Niklas actually came right to the spot. Yeah, correspondence games are great. It's pretty much whatever line I check. I don't even check that much what puny humans over the board are doing, but I always consult the correspondence games database, because these guys have analyzed every move for days with very strong computers. So I like the correspondence chess database to get a quick overview what's going on in the line. Of course, all the games end in draws because it's very hard to win in correspondence chess. But yeah, I find that a very useful source to look at. A lot of guys also generate engine tournaments overnight if they want to get a better opinion than just 0-30 on a certain line, trying to get some statistics, how it plays out. In my more ambitious days, I was doing that, just setting up an engine tournament overnight and have them play. The more serious guys, they even have databases with all these engine games. I don't do that much anymore. But yeah, the correspondence chess and the engine games, engine tournaments are certainly tools that very, very serious professionals should be using. Niklas, I hope that answered your question. I know the answer to all your Najdorf questions too, but I'm not going to give them in this forum. Spatri is saying, hi Jan, as black I play the Alekhine defense against 1 e4, like counter-attacking openings as black. I like counter-attacking openings as black, sorry. Lately I have started feeling I'd be good to have another defense against 1 e4. What would you recommend for someone who doesn't have a great memory and not a lot of time to put into opening theory? Ideally, I'd like something that leads to a structure with fairly clear plans. I thought you liked counter-attacking openings, not a structure with clear plans. Not sure I can help there. As mentioned, I think the best moves for black are e5 and c5 because they grab the most space in the center. Alekhine is playable if you want a structure with fairly clear plans. I don't know, maybe the Caro-Kann for c6, d4, d5. Now if they go knight c3, you take here and you play bishop f5. When, well, this line has fairly clear plans. You get here, you put this here, this here, this here, or you go here and here. Both are playable. While after e5, I think it's not that easy to play for black, the position after bishop f5, knight f3, e6, but you can still play it with fairly clear plans, like you want to get in c5, you want to put the knights here ideally. So maybe c6 might be an opening you want to look into, I'm not sure. Else e4, e5 I think is a pretty good move as well. Yeah, sorry Spatri, I'm not sure that was the answer you were looking for, but yeah. Next is Dr. Boki. He says your series on the Nimzo is great. Actually, thanks for all the praise. I'm not that happy with some of the chapters, especially the 4b6 chapter. Full disclosure, I kind of bungled that one. I gave some lines that aren't really correct. I'm not sure, no one's asked that, but some people have brought up the Nimzo series, so I should address this. I gave some line, what did I give? Bishop b7, bishop d3, b5, queen b1, which I thought was very clever, but it's not really that clever, unfortunately. Forgot y2, which doesn't make it better, but it wasn't that clever. I think black can go bc4 here or something sick. Was that it? bc4? Queen b7 and takes? It's probably not it. This seems to be losing outright. There was something that worked for black here. Wasn't it this? Anyway, let your computer run in this position. It will show you something. Move queen b1 isn't that great. So the b6 chapter, which fortunately no one plays for black, don't trust it too much. And if you run into this position, go for e5. And c takes d4, a3. And black will take here. Go knight to g8, c takes d. And now what do they do? Bishop b7. White is slightly better here. Computer will give you some goofy moves, but in general this position is a bit better for white. So do that instead of what I mentioned in my video. Now to Dr. Boki's question. What is his question? Ah yeah, in the line after queen c2 castles, knight f3, c5 takes, knight a6, g3, knight c5, bishop g2, b6, castles, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, bishop b7, b3. You stop after b3 with a slight advantage. What's going on here? My software is hanging itself. Help me. You stop after b3 with a slight advantage. However, Alekseyev has played that position 3 times with black, especially after queen e7. Do you think this changes the assessment? Nah. I don't actually. I think white is slightly better. He has the 2 bishops. I've seen 1 or 2 of these Alekseyev games. Didn't he lose against... I forgot whom he lost to. But he ended up in some trouble here. Of course, black is solid and it's playable. But no, I think white is a bit better here. I'd play this position every day of the week. Not willing to change my opinion there because of Mr. Alekseyev. Second question. In the line after d5, cd, ed, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, c5, dc. The move castles has become somewhat popular. Do you have any suggestion to this? I've noticed Adams played it once or twice, right? I have to admit, yeah, this was not a line that was ever on my agenda because no one was playing it. I haven't spent that much time on it. e3, bishop e6, I think is what he's doing. And then he wants to go knight d7, rook c8, and take on c5. I'm not sure. I have to spend more time. I haven't checked it in detail. I have to confess. Knight f3, knight bd7. Is this what he does? Yeah, it's on my to-do list to look into this. I'm not quite sure. Sorry. I'm going to have to check it a bit more. First instinct would be to go a3, but I think I'm probably going to have to do better than my first instinct here and actually spend some time. So thanks for pointing it out. I gotta admit, yeah, this is a line that wasn't really on my radar, so I haven't done a lot of work on it. It's become, I think Adams played twice against Shirov and someone else, right? I'll check it out. For now, just blitz out a3 because I've said it in the show, but I'm not quite sure. I'm not into details there. I'll look it up another point. Sorry, Dr. Boki, but thanks for mentioning that. Maybe I'll do an update to all my Nimzo failures one day and address those things. Okay, guys, 10 minutes to go. Apologies already to everybody whom I've neglected or whom I will neglect. Mark is saying, as a premium member, I retake the question of Tennis Boy. Is that even legal? Whatever, we'll let it slide. Is a 3 Queen D6 Sicilian a good choice for black against 1 E4? I don't know. Never struck me as that appealing of an opening, but I know there's guys who play it. Tivyakov comes to mind. I think even Kramnik has played it in a couple games. So I don't think it can be refuted. And it's certainly a playable, lazy choice, which has never been my approach. I mean, I like openings. I like looking at them, analyzing them, and trying to fight for equality or the initiative instead of just, yeah, I don't know, playing d5 and then queen d6 or queen to d8 and taking it from there. But it's certainly a viable approach if you have a little time. I'm not familiar with any refutation of this line, at least. I don't even know what they're doing with white. Normally they go d4 and then knight b5, c4 at a later juncture, right? Not quite sure. I think it's playable, but I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to answer that question. I've never spent literally 1 minute analyzing this position, I don't think so. I don't know. Sorry, man. JP Iceman is saying, hi Jan, after 1 knight f3, f5. Who does that? All these f5s. Why are people so obsessed with weakening their king's position so early? After knight f3, f5, what is the most ambitious or the best try? To d4 or to d3? And why? Don't ask me for whys, just ask what. But why, then I'm going to have to explain stuff. Anyway, I don't think d3 is all that great a move. It's tricky preparing e4. But I think black has been doing all right with knight c6 here. And even, I like this line, d6, e4, e5, knight c3, c5. I think c5 is an interesting way to clamp down on that square. So I don't think d3 is great. I wouldn't go d4 either because you lose some flexibility against the stone wall, for example. So I would go g3 here, bishop g2, castles, and keep my options open with a d-pawn. Because against the stone wall, you might later want to go d3 and e4 and not d4 to get to the y. And that's part one. Against stone wall, what is the most ambitious line? Or what do you prefer to put the knight on f3 or h3? Well, if we start with 1 knight f3, we can't make that choice anymore. And since I do quite often, I've never looked at lines with knight to h3, but they might be very interesting as well. I have no idea. What is your opinion about Avro's recommendation? d4, c4, knight f3, g3, bishop g2, castles, knight c3, queen c2, rook b1, with b4, b5, without exchange dark square bishop. I don't know. I've read Avro's books, the d4 books, but I haven't really checked that line that much. So yeah, as I mentioned, normally against stonewall guys, I like to go 1 knight f3 to not commit my pawn here, because then it's harder for them to play the stonewall, and I'll play d3, e4 later. But these lines here, I'm not a massive expert. What did... sorry, what is the knight doing on d7? It's not going that early. Bishop d6. Yeah, I saw Avro gave this line, queen c2, rook b1, b4. It's probably a playable line. I don't know. I guess it's very move by move, and as with most openings, if you recommend something move by move for white, then black can find a way against it, because black is not that much worse, even here. So I honestly don't know. There are these trendy lines. What did Vichy play? Queen c2 and knight to e5 early, something like that. Tending b6, cd, cd, knight c4. Is this the position? That's probably not the position. I'm mixing up stuff. Ah, yeah, sorry. You start with b3, queen e7. b3, queen e7. Now you go knight e5. When after b6, you often have this trick with takes, takes, knight to c4, trying to get rid of this bishop. which I thought was a bit better for white. This is something I looked at a while back. So I don't think the stone wall is that scary, but I nevertheless tend to avoid it by playing one knight f3 when it's tougher for black to get there, because I haven't committed my d-pawn yet, if I see my opponent is a stone wall addict. And moving on, we're running out of time here, so I'm gonna really have to speed up, and we probably have to do this again. Knight f3, d6, d4, bishop g4. What's the best move for white? I think c4, and white is better. But there's other options as well. Everything's fine. Number 4, after Tata Steel 2015 and Tbilisi 2015, Tomaszewski's 6-8-3 King's Indian success. Who is better, white or black in the actual trend? I have no idea. I haven't followed much. It's a complicated line. I think neither side is better. The theoretical discussions are still very much ongoing there. But it's not a trend I followed that much, because those positions don't suit me from either side. Okay, we'll jump through some more. I'm sorry guys, I've been ignoring the chat, but as you can see, I kind of have my hands full getting through as many of these questions here as I can. And I am the lead-in for Mr. Lawrence Trent, so he's going to start his show in 10 minutes, Q&A. Ask him anything you want. He's not like me, only willing to talk about openings, but you can ask him pretty much anything. I think especially about his private life. Those are the questions he prefers. So I'll answer Go 2006's question, is the triangle a good opening? I think the triangle is this stuff, right? e6, knight c3, c6. I've played it a lot for move order purposes. Objectively, I think e4 is very dangerous for black, but most white players won't be ready for it, and even if they are, you get a very sharp, irrational position and a fight. So it depends on your definition of good. It's not the most solid line out there, but it certainly leads to interesting stuff. That is also his second question, the best line against the, whatever it's called, the marshal? Everything's called the marshal. Should be 2, knight a6. I keep changing my mind here. What do I think? I think bishop a5 is the most challenging move, but I could change my opinion any day of the week. But I think bishop a5 and bishop b6, bishop c3. Sorry, I can't remember a thing, but I think bishop a5 was the critical line. What do you do after b6? Queen d6. I do have a goldfish memory sometimes. Sorry, I haven't looked at this for a while. Yeah, last time I checked, I think I was happy after bishop d6, but unhappy after bishop a5. But that could change the deeper you go. Hope that helped. But yeah, I think the triangle is absolutely playable and at the very least a very decent move order / surprise weapon. Will RS is saying, just like you, Jan, I don't really enjoy playing against the King's Indian. Currently, I've been playing the line with knight g5 and then knight g6, and then knight e6. Many of those lines, and I've also tried the pawn storm with f4, but I prefer to completely avoid those lines in some cases. Same about the Grunfeld. Yeah, not easy, not easy. Maybe one e4. So, do you think something like d4, knight f6, bishop g5 is playable? Sure. The Trompovsky, Mr. Lawrence Trent, did a series on it. I will play it occasionally as a surprise weapon. For me, it doesn't do it as the main weapon. I think after d5, black is very, I'll say it very 5 times, solid. And I also never really found an edge after knight to e4. But it is a playable opening, and it has its own weird little ideas. So absolutely, I think it's playable, especially if you want to avoid the King's Indian badly. And thanks for the praise. All right, last 2 questions, really speeding up here. Samnath Mukherjee saying, hi Jan, I've been trying to find effective lines for blacks against some opening systems like London system, barrier attack and collar system. What's the problem? Especially the London system player seems to have a very effective plan to neutralize most of my tries. Do you have any suggestion or any approach against those systems? Well, I don't know what most of your tries have been, so this is a tough question for me to answer. I'm also not quite sure what the definition of London system is, because everything very much depends on your second move here already. If you go d5, I think London system is normally bishop f4. and you play c5. I've always been very, very happy here with black. It's more of a question if you start with e6, then bishop f4, I guess, is a more serious move, or if you start with g6. But I don't know, it's never been something that concerned me or that I've spent a lot of time on. I think Robin van Kampen covers it in his King's Indian series. In general, I'm happy if players don't play the main lines, but play one of these sidelines that are based not on forcing a draw, but just on getting the pieces out, because it normally means you can also get the pieces out with black without any particular challenges, and white kind of gives up on fighting for an opening advantage, which is all you want from him. So sorry, I would need a bit more specific information, what move you play on the second move, for example, to help you there, but I wouldn't be concerned about any of these lines. All right, last question by Mr. K. Lamar 74, one of my favorite rappers, Kendrick Lamar. Don't think it's him personally, but we will answer his question. Hi Jan, what is the best way or your preferred approach for white to meet Queen's Gambit accepted, d4, d5, c4, d takes c4? Well, we have to differentiate between the best way and my preferred approach. The best way is a move e4. I've been bit reluctant to learn it. It's a lot of theory after both e5 and knight f6, but I don't think there's a lot of doubt nowadays that this is the critical way to meet it. I've mainly been playing e3 for laziness reasons, then knight bishop takes c4, knight f3 castles, and something. But the critical move is the move 3e4. So if you're starting from scratch, analyze that one by all means. Slavov is very last question. He's saying, hello Jan, looks like my question, which I wrote here yesterday, just disappeared. Actually, that might be my fault, because it appeared twice on my screen, and I deleted one of those. But maybe by doing that, I deleted both. I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, sorry about that. So I tried to repeat it. What is your opinion, in your opinion, the best way to play against Czech Benoni? d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5 for white. Once again, I'm not overly qualified. Most of the time I don't go d5, but I go knight f3, just because I prefer not to have the center so locked up, so I can get in my cheap tricks a bit earlier. So I don't have a strong opinion on the Czech Benoni. I think white is better because he has this built-in space advantage. As a general rule of thumb, this is not theoretical advice, but later on, if you put your pawns on g3 and f3, it's going to be very hard for black to create a lot of damage. So even if you start with bishop d3, whatever, knight e2, once these pawns are on g3 and f3 in many positions, I find it very hard to play with black. But I'm sorry, I've never studied this as for what is the most critical line here. I think everything is good. g3, bishop g2, knight e2, planning f4, bishop d3, and knight e2, bishop d3, h3, g4, or even play very conservatively with knight f3, bishop e2 castles. Sometimes you see a guy like Aronian trying this with black, but normally he struggles horribly for 50 moves and then he makes a winning attempt which might or might not work. But it's not a line which is so much about moves, but more about understanding. And like I said, more often than not, I avoid it by going knight f3. So those were as many questions as I could answer in 90 minutes. I'm sorry guys, I already see there's more questions and we're going to have to get to those at another point. For now, it's been a lot of fun to do this. I hope I helped out some of you. Give me some feedback if the pace is too fast, if I should spend more time on individual questions, or if it's too detailed, too slow. Whatever you think, I'll have a look at the live chat now. Don't go away, because now the exciting part of the day is starting with the Lawrence Trent Q&A. I've taken the liberty to troll Lawrence Trent's banter blitz yesterday already, where he played, let's face it, pretty terrible, but we still had a lot of fun. I'm sure the Q&A is going to be the same thing. I'll stick around for that, and I recommend so do you. Thanks everybody for watching. Let's do this again at some point. Become a Chess24 premium member, and follow me on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, do something else that I will profit from one way or another. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Gonna make my move, gonna live my dream. Gonna make my move, gonna live my dream. Every